Welcome to the Pastured Pig Podcast,
where we share the successes and challenges of raising pigs on pasture.
We talk to producers all over the country,
From small homesteads to large commercial pasture operations.
Whether you're new to pastured pigs or have been raising hogs for decades,
We hope you hear new ideas and new perspectives on pasturing hogs.
here's your host, Troy McClung.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Pastured Pig Podcast. Appreciate you all taking the time to listen to our interviews and what we have and our ramblings about pastured pigs. I want to get into our interview here in a second, but just want to do some quick updates. The 4th of July weekend has passed. I hope hope all of you fellow Americans that celebrate Independence Day had an opportunity to take a break, or at least get a project done you've been putting off. We had the opportunity to go away from the farm for about 5 days, actually, and spend some time it's about 3.5 hours away at our camp in the upper elevations of mountains of West Virginia. Had a great time. Just got an opportunity to relax and just enjoy some time away from the farm. And it's one of those opportunities to recharge the batteries, to kind of think about processes, kind of step back and look at what's going on instead of being in the muck and mire every day and having a different perspective. It helped to step back and look and see what we've got going on and kind of do some assessments there. So it was great. It came back, really had the batteries recharged, really ready to take on these projects. Having that energy to really want to dive into it deeply. You kind of figure 4th of July is the halftime of the season if you're in the climate zone like we are. So just to take away from that is, if you get the opportunity to take a break, be sure to factor that in somehow. Everyone needs a Sabbath. Everyone needs a respite to take a break from their hard work. So if you didn't get a chance to take a day or two off on the 4th of July, find some time to get that break. If you have to hire a farm sitter, do it. If you have to spend some money here or there to get stuff covered, do it. It's worth the opportunity to take a break and to rest and recharge those batteries. Well, okay, so today's interview is a little different than what we've been doing. Obviously, we've been talking to pork producers directly and talking about their setup. Well, this is kind of the beginning of a branching out in the Pastured Pig Podcast. Today, we're talking to Dan Proffitt, a.k.a. Butcher Pete. And Dan runs a mobile processing unit in the New England area. He's actually up in New Hampshire. And he's got a really great passion for what he does. He's has a very humane approach to butchering the animals that he does. Has a real heart for the animals' care. Really appreciate his sentiment when it comes to describing what he does. It's also interesting to talk to somebody who you can tell, really loves his work. Dan's not in it necessarily for the money per se, I'm not going to put words in his mouth. It seems like he's in it because of the passion. He loves what he does. He's been butchering for years. He has some great experience in that area. And it's really exciting to talk to somebody that's that passionate about what they do. And I hope we all have that passion. We all have that love to some degree for what we do, whether it's raising our pigs or anything else we do in life, that we can have that same passion that makes life that much more enjoyable. Well, I'm not going to get too deep in the weeds there as far as the philosophy of mobile butchering, but we'll let Dan tell his story. And we went a little long on this one. I think we went a little over an hour in our discussion, but I think it's worth it. I think we could have gone 2 hours, because we really got into some really good discussions of not only what he does, but how that fits into government regulation and all those type of things that get some of us producers blood boiling. All right, without further ado, here's Butcher Pete. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Pastured Pig Podcast. Again, so glad that you all take the time to download our podcast and listen to us as we talk about everything to do with pastured pigs. And today is we're going to take a deviation from our typical our typical interviewee here. Our typical guest is normally somebody raising pigs on pasture, and we talk about their experiences here. But now we're going to kind of get on the other side of the process, kind of the tail end side, and we're going to talk to Dan Proffitt, or AKA Butcher Pete, who is a mobile processor, and he has a really good story. I really like his attitude and his approach towards mobile processing. So I'm going to let him tell this story, but let's get right into meeting. Hello, Dan, and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, Troy, thanks for having me on.
All right, so I obviously got to ask the question. So before we get into all the details here, so your name's Dan Proffitt, but you're Butcher Pete. How did we make that connection with that moniker there?
Yeah, that's right. Well, I was rolling around a lot of names in my head about what we were going to call it. That's the one that stuck in my head, and it comes from an old song by a guy named Roy Brown. And a lot of people ask about it, and I find that it is a strange place for the origin to come from. But I listen to all kinds of different music, and of course, a song about a butcher perked my ears up the first time I heard it. And I always had it on my playlist for when I was cutting meat and stuff. And that's where it came from. When I was trying to come up for names for the company, I was trying to go with something else, but that was the thing that was sticking in my head. So I said, you know what, Butcher Pete, and then I got a built-in theme song if I ever start doing commercials.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah, well, that definitely sticks in your head. You'll remember Butcher Pete for sure.
That's right.
Okay, well, let's talk about your setup and your operation. So, first of all, where are you located, and what kind of region do you cover?
We're up here in New England. Our cooler is located in Walpole, New Hampshire. That's where we do our processing. But we'll travel out to. We've been as far out as Cold Spring, New York. I've done jobs in New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, looking at Maine possibly for some bookings this fall. We'll basically go anywhere within reason. Between Vermont and New Hampshire, for all the New Hampshire jobs, I can process at my Walpole cooler. And we just kind of go anywhere. That's kind of the whole point. A lot of our clients are people who either don't believe in the slaughterhouse system, or they're having trouble loading their animals onto the trailer, or all kinds of different things. There's a lot of different reasons people don't want to take their animals to the slaughterhouse.
Yeah. So you have to help me with the geography here. So if you're headquartered in Walpole, New Hampshire, and you go as far as Maine and northern New York, what kind of distance we talk about here, miles and hours, as far as out and back?
Well, the trip to New York was like 3.5 hours, but that was a certain job where we just did everything right on site. And for those jobs, it can be economical. Of course, the client will pay a travel fee, but it can be economical for us to just roll our trailer up there and do everything right on site. We're getting a little busy at this point to be doing stuff right on site, but it's still a possibility.
Yeah, well, this is fascinating. There's all kinds of questions that pop in my head, so you'll have to forgive me if I jump around like a cricket. But so with this mobile setup, I guess we need to explain exactly, because we've had some people on the podcast that talk about out west they have what they call mobile butchers, but they're just simply taking the pig to the point of being halved, and then it gets delivered to a processor. So explain for our listeners exactly how far you take this.
We take it all the way down to sausage and bacon. My training as a cutter was in a retail sense. I started off at my neighborhood butcher shop when I was 16. When I was in my 20s, I went to Whole Foods, and I worked with Whole Foods for 12 years. I had a great career with them. They were a really good company. And I cut meat all around the country, in New Mexico, New Hampshire, Boston. And I learned a lot of different cutting techniques. I learned a lot of different sausage making techniques. And so when I came back home, I had some friends who own a farm here in New Hampshire. It's called Howling Hill Farm. And I started a farmhand with them part-time, and that's where I learned to slaughter on site. So the actual, the slaughtering process is the part that I'm newest at. And so, the butchers who take it to another butcher, I'm the other butcher that they take it to. So, at this point, I just handle the entire process myself. During the busier parts, I have people that will come and volunteer and help me. But it's a one-man show right here from the moment I walk up and say hello to the pig to the moment it comes back to you in vac seal as sausage.
Yeah, wow. Wow, so let's talk about your setup for a little bit then. So a mobile unit, I assume that's an enclosed trailer that rolls up. You obviously have the tools that you need. So when you did the New York gig, for example, you drove 3.5 hours down, you set up, you dispatched, you went all the way to a finished product there. So what type of equipment, how big of a trailer, how much equipment are we talking about here?
Okay, well, check this out. This is the surprising thing. You need surprisingly little equipment.
Okay.
And, not to throw gasoline on the flames of my competition, but you really don't need that much to do it. When we went and did the New York job, we didn't bring the trailer. That was also a job where we were breaking it down into primals for a chef who was going to basically handle it from there. But if I were to go out and do everything from scratch, I mean, last year before I had the trailer, I could fit an entire butcher shop in the bed of my Toyota Tacoma. You need a couple tables, a grinder, reciprocating saw, a saw to actually break the animal. I use and this is crazy. I need to change this now that I'm getting more business, but in the place of a bandsaw, I just have a DeWalt multi-tool. You know what I mean? It's just an oscillating multi-tool.
Yeah.
You use that with a knife, and that takes care of the animal. I mean, it's a tedious process, but when you're growing from scratch, it kind of was a brilliant idea. And using little tools like that and just having the knowledge, I mean, I can break an entire animal down with a single knife. You don't really need that much if you know where to cut and how to cut. And so the trailer is mostly for refrigeration. You don't even really need it. Most of the year, it's cold enough, not most of the year, but about 6 months of the year here in New England, it's cold enough that you can just go without the trailer.
Yeah.
But, I mean, really all you need is a way to hoist the animal, a way to dispatch the animal, a knife to break it down and skin it, and then a saw for the end. It's a surprisingly small amount of equipment. Now, at the same time, you could go the other route and have your $250,000 USDA rig that has a bathroom and running water on it.
Right.
But, I mean, this is something that happened to me. I didn't build a business plan and go out and buy all my equipment and stuff. It just started happening as word got around that people knew that I was doing it. My phone started ringing. So it's been like, I get this little piece of equipment, I get this little piece of equipment. But I've been getting by on my skill at butchery, essentially. Right,
yeah. That's where you were trained. That's where you have the most experience. So like you said, this is kind of a experience on the back end. Now the front end is just a matter of convenience, and as you see the need and as people request it, then it starts to make more sense to be involved in those areas.
Right.
So
go ahead. Continue. Sorry.
No, I was going to change the subject, so keep going.
No, I was just going to finish up by saying, every piece of equipment that I get makes it easier, makes the process smoother. But I mean, if you really know what you're doing, all you need is a knife and a table and some elbow grease.
Okay. So the New York gig, so I would assume to travel, like I said, you're getting busier now, so may not travel those distances as far or as much. But when you're traveling that distance, was there a minimum that you had to do? But is there also a maximum that you can do? I mean, is there only so much that you can do in a logical time?
Yeah, that's a very variable question. But I'll tell you what, the New York gig was at the beginning when word was just kind of getting out about me, and we kind of me and Caitlin, my girl, we saw it as a field trip, an opportunity to go out and do something cool at a faraway place. We did make money off the job, but at this point, you would probably have to have at least 5 head for me to go out there and do that now. And what I would do at that distance is just set up shop right on your farm, and do the whole thing right there. It wouldn't make any economical sense to drive it 3.5 hours back to the cooler. So yeah, certain constraints are, as a matter of my own success, getting put on me, and you got to roll with it. But what I'm finding is that there's a lot of people out there who are in need of this service, and moreover, they want to get away from the slaughterhouse thing, especially if they don't need USDA. Everybody wants to get away from the packing house for obvious reasons.
Yeah. Yeah, and let's stick a pin in the USDA element there, because I really want to spend some time on that. But that's further downstream in our discussion here. But yeah, I'm sure people are screaming already at their podcast device. What about USDA? What about USDA? So we're getting to that. People, chill out. But I really want to talk about this more and just fully understand the setup and the freedom that you have in being able to roll up to these situations. So we talked about the New York gig was kind of unique, since that was the front end of really getting this project going. So let's take a gig local right now that you're going to roll out, you're going to do X amount, and then bring back to Walpole to finish up. So would you flesh out an example there for us? Pardon the pun.
Okay, so what we would do is I would roll up in the truck. For a lot of slaughters that are more straightforward, I just have one little box of equipment, and I have my hoist. For larger animals, I don't have a hoist that's powerful enough yet for cattle, but we're getting there. So the farmer would have to have a tractor or something, but what I like to do is talk to the farmer a little bit first about how the day is going to go. Mm-hmm. And I like to meet the animal, and I hate to say it, but I like to make friends with the animal a little bit. I want to understand the mood that the animal is in that morning, and sort of get a better idea of what they're expecting with their day. A lot of my job is in order for this animal to go peacefully, you have to read the animal as a creature that morning. And this is where we get into like some a part of it that's maybe a little more macabre, because I do professionally betray an animal's trust. Okay,
Sure.
That's the first thing that I do in the morning is I go in and I make friends with an animal in order to get close enough to kill it. And that's where, obviously there's probably not a lot of vegans listening to the Pastured Pigs podcast, but that's where a lot of people immediately shut down.
Right. And,
I take it as the most important part of the day. That's the part of the day that I get. I'm relieved after that, because when I see the animal go down with no pain, and it was at a peaceful moment in its life, and I can have the peace of mind that now throughout the rest of the process, no matter what I do, that animal went peacefully. You can screw up whatever you want to after that. I mean, I cut your skirt steaks in half. I'm sorry. I'll take $20 off the ticket price. Yada. Whatever. If you screw up that first part of the process, that is just so painful. And when I was learning and when I was younger, I did miss a couple of knocks, and it's just the worst thing in the world. So once that part of the process is over, I can relax. And at that point, we get the animal up on the hook. We do the skinning and the eviscerating, and it's at that point I can listen to my history podcast and drink my coffee, and then get the animal in the truck. You have a surprisingly long amount of time to get an animal into refrigeration, and by long amount of time I mean like 2.5 or 3 hours. Mm-hmm. So I can go a pretty far distance without refrigeration, especially in the cooler parts of the year here in New England.
Yeah.
But it's at that point that you're really racing the clock. Congratulations, you've gotten the animal down safely, and now you have to fight against a lot of different things, especially in the summertime. You're fighting against heat, you're fighting against flies. But once you get the animal into the truck and into the cooler, you're at the next stage of where you can sort of take a breather and relax. At that point, I get the animal's hang weight. If I haven't gone over the cut sheet with the client, I'll finish up and get the gaps in that. And if it's beef, I'll let it hang for a week. If it's pork, I can start processing, as soon as it cools down. So that's the outline of the process. And I got a little heavy on the philosophy there at the beginning, but that's the most important part of the day, is when you're taking the animal's life. And it all centers around that. Everything else around that is just cutting meat.
Yeah, and that's, and I'm glad you said that, because that is what in some of this pre-discussion we had, some of the notes that you sent me originally when we were talking about doing this interview, that's actually the part that intrigued me the most. That I try to think of the analogy. I think of a guy that splits firewood. He looks at a block of wood as something that just needs an axe run through it. And to hear a butcher, to hear somebody say that, somebody that puts animals down professionally, to say that they have that much care and concern for the animal, that's refreshing. Because I know a lot of us that raise pigs on pasture, especially our smaller scale guys, we put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into raising our hogs, and we don't necessarily name each one of them, but we could, because we have some intimate time while they're on pasture to raise them, to make sure they're fed well. And we always say on our farm that we want all of our animals to live the best life they possibly could. They only have one bad day, and of course that's the last day. So no, I appreciate that, and I think that's refreshing to hear somebody that's not become callous to the job to say, well, this is just another block of wood I'm going to go up and split with an axe. So I appreciate that approach, and that's so far removed from what we see with large-scale processing, large-scale butchery shops and processing centers. And one other point, and I know probably people are making the connection here, and I think we should speak into, is the fact that I know when I take my hogs to the processor, and I have an hour and a half drive to my processor, back roads, windy, all that type of stuff. I roll in, it's a commercial facility, USDA, so there's all kinds of stuff going on, a lot of noises, a lot of different smells, a lot of new areas, and those pigs are stressed out. So when we get them off the trailer, they're stressed, and that's always the part that bothers me more than anything, is just the looks on their faces, and the looks that the way they're reacting when they're being unloaded, because that is the most stressful they have ever experienced in their life cycle on my farm.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And they can smell the blood. They can feel the panic. They are very intuitive creatures, and they don't get calmed down once they get in the pens. That's the whole point of the pens. And I used to work at a packing house. It was a good place, and they had the barn designed by Temple Grandin and all. But guess what? A concrete floor or a steel floor, and pens that kind of weave in and out so the animal can't see too far ahead. It's not a comfortable situation for an animal. Yeah. And they're not going to calm down before the slaughter process very much. I love the one bad day thing. I've heard that said before. But you know what? It's my job to make sure that the animal doesn't even realize it's a bad day.
Yeah, I like that.
And I mean, look, if people want to eat meat on a large scale, yeah, you're going to have to use slaughterhouses, but there's no good way to do it. There's only slightly better ways to do it. And I think more people that, like you said, are putting the blood, sweat, and tears into their animals, they're thinking, am I even getting the yield back that I want? Am I even getting am I even getting back my animal sometimes?
Right. Is that my pig?
I can tell you that, most of the time, look, a lot of the fallacies about butchers and butchery, you're probably getting a lot of your animal back. No, yield is not the number one thing that packing house people are thinking about when they're cutting, but you're going to get a good amount of your animal back. But I tell you, like, a lot of these places have grinders that are too big to process your 20 pounds of ground pork. And what they'll do is they'll get the weight off the trim for their custom orders, grind a huge batch of all the ground pork, and then give people back their weight. Because there's no way around it. There's no way that a big, huge... I mean, these grinders that they use in these places, you have to ride a hydraulic lift to get to the top to dump your bin, and you don't even dump your bin. A robot does it for you because it's too heavy. Yeah. Like, you can't grind 20 pounds of ground pork through that. So, all the reasons, from the animal being panicked to it being potentially unsanitary to the workers not treating animals potentially well. I follow a lot of these, like, vegan activist groups online just because I think it's it's informative to keep an eye on the opposition. Sure. But I can't disagree with them half the time. Slaughterhouses, they are what they are. Like, it's not a good time for anybody. Yeah. And my job is to make it, if it's got to happen, like you said, make it respectful, make it peaceful. And then after that, I have almost 19, it's not almost anymore. I'm in my 19th year of cutting meat. Mm-hmm. And if there's any problem with the cut, if there's any problem with the yield, come talk to me about it, the man who cut the entire animal. And that kind of peace of mind is why people are going to more butchers like me.
Yeah, I can see that. I love the specialty. I love the niche. There's just so much benefit from that just resonates with me. So getting through our processing story again. So in that example where you've taken the carcass back to the cooler there, and you've got your hanging weight. Obviously, you've gone over the cut sheet. So at that point, you start breaking the pig down. If it's a cow, it's going to hang for a while, but you're going to start breaking that pig down, and you're going all the way to vacuum seal and smoke, cure, sausage grind. What all you got going on there?
Yeah, that's when I can really have fun, because you're not so much on the clock. I know in my busy season, I'm not going to be taking coffee breaks too often. It's going to be slammed. But right. Here in my slow season, I can listen to a podcast while I'm cutting, and I leased the cooler from a couple who used to make cheese. It's actually in their basement, but it's this enormous walk-in cooler with a prep area and a 3-bay sink that used to be all health department inspected when they made cheese, and now they're retired, so they just lease it out to me, so it still gets some use. So at that point, I can really, I've had nights where I just cut meat till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, just because I don't have any boss telling me to go home, and I want to get the job done, and Dunkin' Donuts is still open for another hour, so let's roll. I prefer working that way. I don't like the 9 to 5 thing. I don't ever look at the clock and say, oh, it's time to stop cutting meat. It's like, is the job done or not? So I've got a couple freezers over there. It's going to grow into probably 4 or 5 freezers this fall, and I cut, I pack. Sometimes I have a friend come help me with the packing and the grinding, so that I don't get bogged down in that. But it gets packed, it gets labeled, it gets put in the freezer, and then I give you a call and say, hey, it's time. The smoking and the curing, I'm kind of putting out to third parties right now, because I'm not quite set up for it, and I don't have too deep of a background in it. So I want to get some equipment. I want to do some test runs on smoking some bacon and some hams, and then I'll be doing all that in-house too. But yeah, the sausages as well. I do a lot of the blending of the sausage mixes by hand. I've been making sausage since I was 16 years old. I linked my first sausage at the butcher shop, and I'm 34 now. So that's the part where I really get to have fun. The time crunch is kind of off, because you're working in the refrigeration and you're kind of working at the pace that you want, and that's the real butchery part of it, and the only drawback is that you kind of want somebody doing the packing and the sealing and the labeling for you, because it can bog you down if you're a one-person show.
So do you have that opportunity? Do you have help that comes in? I know you mentioned your girl that can help you out. Do you have other staff that you get from time to time?
Yeah, Caitlin is fantastic. She was doing poultry before we even met, so she helps me with my poultry job. She's a real boost to those days, and she doesn't do too much of the other butchery these days, because she's got her own job, and now we're having a baby, so she's a little busy with that. But I have an apprentice, Riley Lawn, who actually just moved to Portsmouth. He kind of flew the coop for a little bit, but he's a graduate at Johnson & Wales. So he's got a background in cooking, but he really wanted to learn butchery. And the last retail place that I worked at, he came there as counter staff, and I kind of poached him because he's such a fantastic worker. And now he's my apprentice. Unfortunately, it's not like a 40-hour-a-week gig. It's like when I can have him. But that kid's been just absolutely kicking butt. He picks stuff up, and on the first day that we were breaking down hogs together, I showed him the first hog, and after that he was breaking them himself, and so he's just a real bright kid who really wants anything about food, culinary. He's all about it. So now he finally got his first real chef job, cooking job up in Portsmouth, I think. So he kind of came to me and was like, hey man, is it cool if I move away, and blah, blah, blah. I was like, is it cool? Dude, get the hell out of here and go start your career. But then also my buddy Dan Carr, he's probably the fastest red meat cutter I know. He works at the packing house up at Vermont Packing House in Springfield. That's where I worked. I only worked there for a few months because my business just grew too fast and I had to quit. But Dan's like totally nuts. knockout cutter. He's a fun dude. He's the kind of guy that just, like, you can talk crap all day back and forth to each other and just cut meat and have a roaring good time. I really, really had a lot of help from him last fall. So yeah, there's people I can call on, you know, and I give them all shout outs by name because they deserve it. They're all really good at what they do, and they help me whenever they can.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I know we could go down this rabbit trail quite a bit, but yeah, as a person that's broken down a couple hogs and realized how bad I am at it, that, you know, I am an idiot with a knife. And to see somebody, you see some of these videos, and you get to, every once in a while you get to actually see somebody who knows what they're doing. And it really is an art, and it seems to be a lost art the further we go. But I really appreciate somebody that can take the time and fully understand and get the best yield, but really know what they're doing, and not only do it well, but do it efficiently and do it quickly.
Yeah, and that, you know, a piece of this moving forward is, I do want a huge educational piece of this, not just doing butchery classes for the public. That's all well and good, but, you know, my eventual goal is to have a meat locker here in Cheshire County and to have a staff of cutters working with me that I'm bringing up, and people who are going to be in this industry forever, because, as you said, you know, people probably been saying meat cutting's a dying trade since like the 70s, and honestly, they're probably right. There is no certification in America anymore. There's no true journeyman situation.
Really?
People ask me, you know, how can you say that you're a master butcher? And I tell them, because you can't tell me I'm not. Because 0.05% of the population can tell me that I'm not. And that's just it, man. And so what we're looking for is people who are, like, going to lock in. You know, a kid like Riley, who, yeah, he's going to do the culinary thing probably, but he's got this passion. He just wants to know everything about how the food gets to the table, and his butchery skills are great. And you know, there's two different kinds of meat cutters. There's guys who get paid and pick up their check, and then they'll go, like, work at their buddy's construction company as soon as they can make a little more money. And then there's guys like me who I've tried to leave several times. I'm not going anywhere. This profession's not letting me leave, man. Yeah. And now it's my thing. I love it. I've really, you know, I say without any hyperbole that this is one of the reasons why I was put here, to do this, and I'm going to do it for the rest of my life. Yeah,
excellent. So let's talk about where you are right now with that size. Again, being able to have some of this help when you need them. So how big would you say that there's a max if a farm calls you and says, all right, Daniel, I need X amount of pigs processed in one go. What is that number X that you would say would be your max?
I mean, all by my lonesome, I can do 5 pigs in a day.
Okay.
And it might be a pretty long day, but I can do it.
That's a lot
if I had my trailer with me and another person with me, I could probably get up to 8 or 9. But it's luckily I haven't had to think about that too much. Clients that have large orders, like I have one gentleman who's going to have something like 20 pigs, 5 sheep, and 50 turkeys in October. He's going to eat up almost my whole October. But it's the kind of thing where I'm going to be going back once a weekend to be knocking out 5 hogs, knocking out 6 hogs, knocking out 4 hogs, and then, you know what I mean?
Yeah, do a batch process, yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing for larger jobs. But I'd say that probably 5 hogs in a day would be my max. I could probably put 2 or 3 cattle a day into my truck, if my truck could physically hold that much, but it can't because it's Tacoma.
That's right.
But to do everything down to sausage and all, I think our record is, and let's see, I think 4 hogs in a day from field to sausage, me and another cutter, is kind of my all-time high score so far.
Wow, that's moving.
But that's sausage linked in vacuum seal, you know, in a day.
And that's just phenomenal. You know, you think about, I think of some small process, and I'm usually around the 15 to 20 hogs at a time. But I think of some of the smaller producers I know that, man, what an awesome situation would be to say, okay, you're going to roll up, you're going to dispatch my pigs this morning, and before you're done this evening, you're going to give me finished product.
Oh yeah, I mean, one job last year, we actually stayed with the family that we were doing the hogs for, because we did 2 hogs on site for one family, and this other family was just a few miles over in the next town, so they let us stay at their place. We slaughtered the hogs that night, same day as we did the other 2 hogs, and then the next day we processed them literally in their kitchen. So they're sitting there frying up the sausage as I'm mixing it to make sure, you know, you know what, you should put a little more paprika in there or whatever, you know, and that's, you know, once I saw that and I realized that could be my job, I said, I have to do this. This is the coolest job that I could ever think to have in my life.
Yeah, I love that story because that's what resonates with me. We have a local nonprofit that has an addiction recovery center and a homeless shelter, and we've helped them get an ag program going. And so the first set of hogs that I helped them raise 6. We broke one down just to try it out. So here's guys that are overcoming addiction. They've been in the program for 6 to 8 months. You're really starting to get their lives back together and experience something that, you know, most of these guys haven't even been off concrete. And here they are experiencing this farm endeavor as we're breaking this hog down. And again, like I said, I'm an idiot with a knife, so you'd probably roll your eyes if you saw what we did. But here we're creating, and we just broke the whole thing down for sausage, because with a homeless shelter, you just want to be cranking out the sausage, and literally doing that, you know, putting a pinch of mix in, turning around, throwing it right down on the skillet, frying it up, and be like, oh wow, that's great. Okay, man, that is so fresh. That's good. Oh, let's try a little bit of this. Let's try a little bit of that. And then just trying all these different blends in this commercial kitchen downtown in our capital city. It's just, there's just something just so surreal about it, but just seems so interesting to me, and just so just enthralls me to be a part of that.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, every job that I do in the field turns into a day. You know, a day that you spend with these people who raise these animals, and you know, sometimes they'll make you lunch or bring you coffee, or you know, it's just completely different than the situation that I used to have working in retail, where, you know, in Boston I could wait on 250, 300 people a day. During the holidays, many more. Yeah. And there's just not even time to take a breath, let alone get to know people. And that's not to say that I didn't make some long-lasting friendships over the counter when I was in retail. I did. I met some great people who I still keep in contact with to this day, who were just at one point my customer. But there is no way that you can have the kind of relationship that you have with each individual client. I'm looking at a situation right now where between 150 and 175 clients is absolutely the most that I can handle, probably in a year, with help at the current size that I'm at. And there's full accountability. There's a relationship that builds. There's a rapport that builds, and there's a trust that builds. And there's just no way that you can get that buying meat at a grocery store or taking your animal to the slaughterhouse.
Yeah. Yeah. So with that scale, and of course, answer this question to the depth that you want to answer, feel comfortable answering. So to that scale where you have that many customers say, this is the max I can do in my existing condition, is that a comfortable wage? Is that a self-supporting business at that point for you? Is it, well, I got some slow times. I got to do some other things to make up for that. Or is this something that'll just keep you rolling?
No, that's the number that's the sweet spot for me, where it's paying the bills, paying the taxes, taking care of the family, taking care of the business. You know, I'm not going to be driving a Mercedes, but to be perfectly honest with you, I don't really want to drive a Mercedes. Yeah. So I think that's the level where I'm going to be most comfortable. Pushing beyond that is going to be possible and probably inevitable, but it's at that point where I'm going to be taking more of a CEO role and less of a cutter's role, because I won't physically be able to cut that much meat. But at the same time, you know, I don't want to get too big. I have toyed with the idea of getting a second truck going in the future, you know, franchising or something crazy like that. But I think the real goal for me is to get the meat locker. If I could get a meat locker going in Keene, that way I could comfortably grow beyond that and maybe up to 300 or 400 clients. But that would require a lot of centralization and streamlining that I just don't have right now. Again, going back to the DeWalt multi-tool, I'd really like a bandsaw. I don't have one. I'm probably going to be purchasing one before the fall. But with the equipment that I have, I could probably double the amount of processing that I could do if I had the proper equipment. But growing into the role, some of this equipment is so expensive that you have to really be patient for it to come into your life,
Yeah, I understand that. Shame you're not closer. There's a perfectly good meat bandsaw in that nonprofit's warehouse I was telling you about. We had somebody 2 years ago donate a bunch of processing equipment to it, and it's still in the warehouse.
Oh wow! Maybe if the gas money isn't too expensive, I'll come down.
Well, there you go. Yeah, you talked about it not growing too much, but maybe if you upgrade that Toyota and get you a bigger truck, you can do something.
Well, I tell you, we can riff on that Toyota a little more before we move forward. I really put the suspension of that poor girl through the ringer, I just had to take it in for some repairs. And I was thinking to myself, like, you can't really afford $1,500 a year in repairs because you're overloading this thing with cows. So, but that's the thing is that it's got to grow, and that big box truck is coming with the crane and everything, but it's not here now. So we're just being patient.
Well, and that's, my goodness, from a perspective of my day job, marketing and business consultant, I really, it's refreshing when I hear people say that instead of saying, oh, I've got great credit, I'm going to go out and I'm going to put this on credit, I'm going to put that on credit, and then they realize, man, I got to do X amount a month to even cover the bills. And you get upside down so quick in that situation. That's what causes businesses to go under. They just leverage all their liquidity up front, and they're screwed.
Oh, yeah. And, not that I couldn't use, any angel investors out there, not that I couldn't use a small business loan or something. Next year, one of my financials are, when I have a larger history of financials, I might go for one. But, you're right. A lot of people put a lot of faith in their ideas. And I got to tell you, that is a Disney proposition. You really have to know what you're doing, and like you said, if you can't make that certain, amount per month to pay those loans off, your whole dream just went up in smoke because you got too big for your britches. Yeah. And as I said, there have been times where I didn't think I was going to be able to go do a job because of my lack of equipment. And then you get there on the day and you're like, wait a second, all I needed was this saw and this knife. I know how to do everything else. And in that way, the biggest equity that my company has is my experience. So, for right now, that works. I get by on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one thing that pops into my head, like I said, I know I'm all over the place here with questions, but one thing that pops into my head is this relationship you have with your customers. As you're coming on their farm, as you're integrating with their process, you're obviously interacting with their animal. Do you find, this is kind of a two-legged question here about education, is there a hurdle you have to overcome to educate the person as to what you're going to do, how you're going to do it? Is a farmer standing there with a shotgun saying, I'm ready to shoot this hog? Are you going to do that? Yeah. Do you run into that? Or do you have people over your shoulder saying, teach me everything you know, Daniel. I want to watch it. I want to know all this.
It's a good combination of both, especially with the pig people, because pigs, as you know, are kind of one of the animals that people get into at the beginning for a lot of different reasons. But pig people tend to be newbies at this kind of thing, unless they're like the client that I talked about that has 25 hogs or whatever, or they're breeders or whatever doing a meat share. And there's a lot of that educational aspect. But the cool thing is that most of them are really interested, and they want to watch the whole process. There's a couple of people who really want me to come to their farms and do the whole thing right in front of them, which, as I said, is not so much an option these days. But, there's also the other aspect of it where I work with people who, in terms of farming, have way more experience than I have. I've raised a couple of hogs and some goats and chickens, but I'm learning all kinds of stuff. And I have a friend who's a vet who, I actually learned, it's the farm that I talked about where I learned how to do the slaughtering. She asks me, all the time, what breed of whatever did you slaughter this weekend? I'm like, ooh, forgot to ask that part. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, there's parts where I'm a real newbie still, and it comes to that, the agricultural side of it, where I'm still learning, the difference between all the breeds and everything. And but when it comes to making sausage, I can literally do it in my sleep. I do a lot of the time when I have a lot of jobs lined up. Sometimes I just dream that I'm cutting meat. So, but that's one of the coolest parts is that we're all learning this together. And, some of my clients want to just have me shoot the hog and then they go watch the football game. And some of them legitimately bust out a skinning knife and they're like, show me how to skin this thing.
Yeah.
And it's awesome.
Well, I think, and again, obviously, as you look at your business model and what works, you know what works and what doesn't. But I would think there would be a value-added opportunity in your business to do some educational elements. I know, man, if you were closer to me, I'd definitely have you out and I'd be hanging over your shoulder because I'd want to know how to break one down. I'd want to learn even just a fraction of the percentage of what you know when it comes to that, because that fascinates me. And I think you'd have the opportunity to say, hey, man, I'm going to do a butchery class. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And we're going to go to this farm and do that. I think Hand Hewn Farm is known for doing that. I see them on YouTube a lot. A lot of other YouTubers talk about those guys, and they travel around and they teach people kind of how to do traditional hog butchery. So I think that would be an opportunity there as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm in talks with a couple of different farms right now for this fall, having workshops like that. I'm happy to do that. One of the things that I have to warn people about, though, is taking a butchery class is going to give you the fundamental, basic knowledge of the process and a couple of little details involving the process. But there are things that are elemental to a butcher, like knife handling, like keeping your grind ratios good while you're knowing what's trim and what's not trim, knowing what's a tendon and what's edible, what's not edible, and
we want to keep a knife sharp. Yeah,
keeping a knife sharp. I mean, these are things that take people years to learn, and I have to be real clear with some people that I can show you as much as you want, or you could watch a YouTube video and go right along with it with the knife. But there are aspects of skill to butchery that you're not going to be able to develop unless you have a knife in your hand for 8 to 10 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week. And so I try to get people not too excited about the butchery classes.
Sure.
And I try to be very clear about what it is about, which is about the basic intro to this kind of stuff and understanding the process from beginning to end, and maybe, cutting a couple pork chops along the way. But I try to be real careful about letting people know, like, you're not going to walk out of even, a weekend session, a butcher. You're going to walk out with a pretty good idea of the process and that kind of thing. But it takes a long time to really learn some of the more nuanced things about the process. And that's where that's why we're really hard on apprentices, because we don't want people who aren't going to hang around for very long.
Yeah. Wow, awesome. Well, let's address the 900-pound gorilla in the room that I'm sure people are wondering, and we promised we'd talk about it. What do you do when it comes time for the U.S. duh? Yeah, how do you deal with those? How do you do this legally? What are all the hoops that you have to jump through?
Yeah, well, I work under the custom exempt laws, which are actually up here, very forgiving. I can process up to 1,000 chickens for a person per year, and they can sell them at farmers markets and stuff. As for the four-legged creatures, none of that stuff can be for resale, except unless you're doing a meat share, which is very specific and rigidly designed direct to customer sale. So the person basically has to buy the whole animal or half the animal while it's still on the hoof, and then it trips and falls over a knife on the way to their home.
Right.
And, but, there's plenty of business out there for cutters like me, for farmers who just need it for their own personal consumption. I get call animals a lot. People don't want to go through the difficulty of taking a call animal to the slaughterhouse. A lot of my off-season work comes from people who can't even get the animals onto the trailer. So, like, the custom exempt laws exist for animals to be processed in that way. Mm-hmm. What's unfortunate about mobile butchery in New England is that the USDA has a real monopoly here. There are USDA mobile butchers in other parts of the country, but they operate in places where the farms are much larger, much more well-equipped, and, I mean, let's face it, out west where a lot of these cattle farms are, it's not exactly like it's very hilly, not compared to here in New Hampshire. My girl who's from Kansas is like shaking her head. But, some of these rural farms up here in New England, I mean, the USDA is very strict about how it has to be processed. You have to have a flat concrete place to park the trailer, which that, number one, just rules out a lot of these places up here in New England where there isn't a flat spot anywhere on the farm. And, forget about having a concrete slab specifically just for that.
Exactly.
Then there's all these other regulations. You have to provide an office and a bathroom for the USDA inspector. I mean, the actual rig that you need for a USDA mobile thing is very expensive. And then to meet all the requirements up here in New Hampshire, you're limited to very few farms that could actually even meet the requirements. And that's one of the things that, in the long term, honestly, I want to kind of try to break through, because there's no reason that these rural farmers shouldn't have access to USDA mobile slaughter. The only reason is that big ag has very powerful lobbyists who want the rules written in very specific ways to squeeze out farmers and slaughtermen like me. They want everything. It's that get bigger, get out thing that started in the 70s.
Yeah.
Everything has to be industrialized. Everything has to be big scale. Everything has to be regulated down to the letter. And, honestly, I've been doing mobile slaughter for a few years now. You can safely put an animal in the cooler with very little. And I just think that it's such a bully tactic that the USDA uses to basically keep – honestly, I think it's just a plan to make it hard for small farmers. They want everything big. They want everything industrialized. They want everything like a big factory. And – that's what they think the future of animal agriculture is, but I know, being in the trenches, that it's not.
Well, also an element of control, and obviously I'm not going to light my torch and get my pitchfork out here, but I definitely feel what you're saying there. But definitely an element of control. Regulation gives control. Regulation helps eliminate the fringe, helps eliminate the unknown from their perspective. So I think there's definitely ulterior motives in this, and of course it's all done under the guise of public safety, when we've proven over and over again that public safety and public health, when it comes to handling our food, usually is best going back to more traditional ways than doing this big industrial ag process.
Right, and it's a self-fulfilling thing, because in order to have a large-scale industrial animal agriculture process, things get really dirty and things get really greedy. And if people aren't watched like hawks throughout the entire process, I mean, when they'll try to get away with whatever they can. When I worked at this small facility in Springfield, Vermont packing house. I mean, it was a very tiny packing house, and they had like 4 USDA inspectors watching every single part of the process like hawks. And it's like, well, why do they need to be doing that? Perhaps we're moving the process along too quickly. Perhaps we're pushing the margins, the profit margins, a little too much, so that farmers would cut corners, or that slaughter operations would cut corners, and you wouldn't get a clean, healthy product. It's the force of that industrialization that requires USDA inspectors in the first place. Again, going back to accountability. I work with my client. I cut the meat for them. I deliver it back to them. I am held accountable for that meat, okay? If somebody takes it to the slaughterhouse, it passes through dozens and dozens of hands before it gets into the box. And throughout that process, if it's not watched, it could be contaminated. So it's like a self-fulfilling thing where the larger the system gets, the more regulation it requires, and so on and so forth. And the bureaucrats just like cackle to themselves,
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, man, wow. So as far as the exemption goes, do you still have any type of inspection? Did you have to be certified? Did you have to have somebody come out before they gave you this business license or anything to get into this process?
No, I read the custom exempt laws, and it doesn't. I didn't see anything like that. If you know of that kind of thing and I'm operating unawares, let me know, but I don't think so. I'm pretty sure that if the government comes and rolls up and asks what I'm doing, I get to tell them to pound sand, because it's none of their business. It's a transaction between me and a farmer. I am cutting their meat for them, and it's going back in their cooler. Yeah. There are a lot of different rules that you have to follow, but as I said, here in Vermont, New Hampshire, they're not that strict. But no, as far as I know, the government cannot intrude in what I'm doing, unless it gets to the point that they find out that one of my clients is selling the meat retail.
Right.
I mean, at that point, though, it's between the government and my client. I make it very clear to all my clients that it's not for resale, and it's a cornerstone of the whole process. It's like, look, this is not to go into your butcher shop or whatever. If you're doing meat shares, the paperwork has to be razor sharp because I'm not responsible for you selling this meat. Yeah. So in that way, the meat never really, it never belongs to me, and it doesn't become my property. I don't sell it for retail. They don't sell it for retail. So that there's no jurisdiction for the government there.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, I know you mentioned that you also do poultry, and here in our state of West Virginia, we have the 1,000 bird exemption, and it's kind of interesting. The regulations are literally a pick list of 10 things. And those 10 things are pretty nebulous. It's pretty basic. You just need a clean environment. And I've heard Joel Salatin rail about this for years when it comes to poultry processing. It really comes down to, in our state at least, they really don't have anyone to enforce it. They don't have any manpower to do any type of inspection. So it really goes after the complaint system. If somebody complains about it, then they got to send somebody out to look at it. But they really don't even have any specific guidelines. There's a lot of variables in there. There's a lot of perception. Well, this is how I perceive this to be. So it really makes it interesting. And so I wondered, on the flip side of that, are there any organizations? Obviously, I figure you have to have some sort of liability rider for this. But are there any organizations, any legal defense that mobile butchers get to take advantage of?
I seriously doubt that. I would think that it's such a niche thing that, I'm one of a handful of mobile butchers in all of New England.
Yeah, wow.
And a lot of the other guys don't really advertise what they do very much because I think they kind of do it under the table.
Sure.
So, I don't even think that people have thought of that yet.
Yeah,
and
may not.
That's kind of one of the things. That's one of the reasons why I want to be out in the open about it and make it a big thing so that maybe these guys can come out of the shadows a little more. I think that there's space for a lot of this in New England and all over the country. And, the more people do it and shine a light on it and say, look, what are the regulations? I'll follow them. I think the less scared people will be about getting pinched. I think some of these dudes actually think it's illegal.
Yeah,
which is funny.
Yeah, it's one of the things. And again, like you say, that's almost deliberate. Is let's keep this nebulous. Let's keep it vague. That way, the typical person thinks they've got everything to lose if they step out of line in any way. And
right,
guy's not going to stick his head out of a foxhole if he thinks he's going to get it blown off every time. So.
Right, and you said you're not going to light your pitchfork, but light your torch and hold your pitchfork, but I'll hold them for you because I really don't mind being a thorn in the government side. I actually can't wait until I get to a point where I can start hassling USDA lawyers because honestly, without using too many $13 words, I think it's a bunch of crap. I think that they have had a organized program since the early 70s to crush the American farmer, and whatever I can do to fight back against that and to just, if I can't blow up their tank, maybe I can rip the tread off it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Anything I can do to just move the small farmer forward back towards where we used to be in America, where, when America started, the small farmer was the cornerstone of this country. Thomas Jefferson wrote extensively about it and about how this country would fall apart without small farmers, and he wasn't wrong, okay? I think that a large part of individual Americans' deracination from their own selves, this depression wave that we're dealing with, this anxiety that the entire country has, part of it is how disassociated we are with the earth, where our food comes from, how much work it takes to produce the things that we consume. And I just think that the more people know that there are services like mine or other different small farm services available, the more confidence that they're going to have in getting back into small farming. Because one of the reasons people don't do it is because they're scared. And I think that the more support they see along the way, the more people will go, you know what, I can raise my own pork. I don't need to buy that garbage pork from the grocery store that's super lean and super pale and doesn't taste like anything.
Right. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and again, it still blows my mind as long as I've been in this. Still blows my mind the disconnect that people have from their food and from the understanding, or just the desire to be blinded by it. I mean, I even in my own family have a sister-in-law who she refuses to eat any of our pork products because she knows it's something that I raised and it was an animal and it had a face, it had a whole, but that she doesn't mind rolling up to Burger King or going to the supermarket and buying meat. She's not a vegan. She'll eat it all day long. She just doesn't want to know where it came from, which again just seems so absurd to me.
Yeah, and I've dealt with that a lot as a butcher. A couple of my favorite stories back when this is when I was a teenager at Paul's Choice, which was the butcher shop that I worked at when I was a kid. I remember one of the girls who worked the cash register walked through the cutting room, and we were all cutting up a bunch of chickens. I was just pulling chickens out of a box, and we were just cutting them up with cleavers on the table. And she goes, and bless her heart, she was like a 15-year-old girl. She was like, "Oh, that's so gross." And we were like, "What? You don't like chicken?" And she said, "The chicken that I eat doesn't come out of a box." And we were like, we're not going to comment on that. Just go up to the register. But then even more recently, I post everything on my social media. I'm extremely transparent in my process, and I posted a picture of my apprentice skinning a cow on site, and a lady who followed me, who I didn't know who this person was. I have a lot of strangers following me now because of the Butcher Pete thing. She said, I like meat just as much as the next person, but this is a little much. I don't think that people need to see this. And my response to her was, this is what a hamburger looks like before it grows up.
Right, yeah.
And it's if you want to get down to the nitty gritty, if I had a couple shots of whiskey, I'd probably tell you that if you make the choice to eat meat, you should have to kill one of the things that you eat at least once in your life. You should have to see that animal make that sacrifice. Now, I know that's a little much for most people, so I'll go a little lighter on the rhetoric and just say that if you're going to choose to eat meat, you should be at least familiar with the process and not skeeved out at the sight of an animal being skinned. That animal gave the greatest sacrifice that it could give, and it had no choice in the matter. So the most respect that you can show for it is to not be skeeved out about it. And I almost just said right then, skeeved out like a little kid. But you know what? Some of the most captive audiences that I've ever had while cutting meat on site have been the little kids of the farmers that are raising the animals.
Right.
And so if even little kids can be curious and respectful of the process, so can you, Mr. I eat 50 hamburgers a year or whatever. You know what I mean?
Oh no, you're definitely on my soapbox, man, and I know we could go on for hours about this because I definitely agree with you. Raising hogs, raising chickens, especially chickens, for crying out loud, where everything eats chicken, so you got all this predation issues, you've got the things that go along with that, the work that goes into it. And this is what I've taught my boys. My boys are teenagers now, and they've been a part of this. They've had a hand in it, so they understand. But at the beginning, it's like, I want to see every bite of that plate cleaned off. If anything goes in the garbage, anything that I work my butt off to raise, I'm going to punch somebody in the nose.
You end up such a deeper respect for your food. And I've had that same experience going, you know what, I don't think I can finish these last two bites, but you know what? That pig that I raised gave its life, and I could show it the respect of finishing those last two bites, taking those nutrients into my body, and nourishing myself from that.
Absolutely. I mean, my wife's an incredible cook and has been for 24 years. That's why we do a podcast, so nobody sees my girth. But so even as long as she's been cooking, when we started raising our own stuff about 10 years ago, she has a whole new appreciation in the preparation because she's out there helping me process our broilers. And she's got small hands, so she's a really good eviscerator. She knows how to get to the lungs, and so she's in there doing that. And she's like, wow, when back in the day when I used to go to the grocery store and buy a 10 pack of breast meat and be like, oh, okay, we'll buy this. Oh, I can't believe this is $6. I'm paying that for X amount of pounds of whatever chicken came from anywhere. And now sees, okay, when we raise it ourselves, and one chicken only has 2 breasts, so if you're going to make a big chicken breast dinner for a bunch of people, then you're dealing with a lot of chicken here, and it just gives a newfound respect for the amount of work that's put into it, from start to finish, from raising it even all the way up to the cooking and preparing of it.
Oh yeah, and through my career, I've developed a couple of pretty morbid jokes that I won't say on the air about the waste that comes from choosing to just eat a boneless, skinless chicken breast or just that half-pound sliver of salmon from the thick end, not from the tail end, please. I had a lot of pet peeves in my retail years.
Yeah.
And what you just brought up inadvertently, one of the biggest things about this that blows my mind, and that I'll get on another soapbox about, that I almost forgot about. The industrialization of this process has driven the cost of meat to an unsustainably low number. Right. And I follow a lot of butcher groups on Facebook just as much as I follow the vegan activists. And, guys from, Piggly Wigglies or whatever, your typical, Albertsons, whatever, they'll post these doorbuster sales that they have for like 89 cents a pound boneless pork chops. And I'm like, yo, you can hear my New Jersey come out a little bit just then. Yo, how do you even get a pig to that size for that price? And the answer is you physically can't unless you are mistreating the pig as part of the process. You know what I mean? Or you're treating the farmer as a slave because, look at the situation with some of these chicken farmers for Purdue. They get levied with these huge loans. They end up not being able to pay them back unless they produce 18 million chickens by this point, and they essentially become slaves to a system. And so, the system that makes slaves out of farmers and cheap commodity out of meat, I'm sorry, but that's not sustainable, and the American public has to shake its head a little bit and shake out of that dream that you can have 89 cents a pound boneless pork chops or boneless skinless chicken breasts forever. It just is not going to work.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think each of us producers, whether it's beef, chicken, pork, whatever, each of us producers have to be ready to defend, but not only defend but advocate what we do. I can remember having a conversation probably 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, as I was just starting to sell retail cuts of my pork. A guy arguing with me, I can't believe you're selling your bacon for $8.50 a pound when I can go down to Walmart and I can get it on sale for $3 a pound or whatever. And you can only talk so much to a guy and you say, buddy, I'm just not you're not my customer type. If you don't see the difference, and not just in the quality of my pork and how good it tastes, and I treated it humanely, all that stuff, but just the fact that you discount where your food source comes from, that you don't even give a crap as long as it's a certain price, and you're going to say price is always going to drive why I buy food, then I can't get through to you in one setting. It's going to take months of conversation to convince you of why an $8.50 pound pack of bacon actually makes sense.
And you probably won't get through them anyway. One of the things I always say that is a little harsh, but it's true, is that the only thing that's cheaper than the American public is slave labor. And, the American public has been trained that cheaper is better, and anything of quality, quality doesn't really factor into the equation when you're talking to most Americans. And that goes to every aspect of their life, from the clothing we choose to wear, to the food we choose to eat, to the entertainment we choose to consume. Whatever is there and cheap and accessible, people tend not to think about it much. And I made a nice healthy career at Whole Foods, convincing that guy that you were just talking about that the bacon was worth $8.49 a pound. But just like you said, there are going to be people who sneer and go, "I'm going down to Walmart to get whatever they have down there," and they're lost causes. But I think that most people, there is a resurgence in the desire to know where your food comes from and the desire to know that it came from a good place, especially meat, because, a pig gives a different sacrifice than a carrot. And it should be important to people that the animal had quality of life and that it died well and was processed at the best quality. Now, Temple Grandin tricked everybody because nobody would listen to her when she said, make it better for the animals. Then when she proved to the meat industry that it was better for the bottom line to be good to the animals, then everybody started getting in line. Yeah. So, we do live in a country where money talks, and that is another part of the educational piece that I do, is to try to get people to understand you can't physically raise good meat for that price.
Exactly. Yeah. Something has to give somewhere. You're cutting corners somewhere, and that's going to show up throughout the process. You just have to know the process and be more educated on your food source.
Right.
Well, man, obviously we could go on for forever, and we're already past the 1 hour mark. But I appreciate it. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and would love to have you back on. We'll get into some of this more because I think there's stuff that we've just begun to scratch the surface on, and I think we could get into it. Maybe even have our listeners submit some questions. I know when you talked about the sausage going into the platform, and are you really getting your own sausage back at the big producers? There's some people clutch their chest and say it isn't so. So
well, yeah,
we could probably have you come back and tell processing horror stories for an hour or so.
Oh, yeah. And you know what? I can tell you the horror stories, and I can tell you the good stories, too, man. There's a lot of all I can say is, trust your butcher as much as you can. And, normally 9 times out of 10, if you get less yield back than you thought, especially if it's a guy like me, he there's a lot of different factors to that. But, you do have to kind of hold the processing house's feet to the fire, because those places do a lot of business. They process a lot of head, and if you're bringing in 2 or 3 animals at a time, you can get lost in the shuffle. Even in the best laid plans.
Yeah. I remember one of the first butchers I took mine to. He was a USDA guy, and of course here in West Virginia it's all smaller scale, but he was one of the few USDA guys we had, and he messed up my hams. He had an issue where he ruined, I think, 18 hams. And so he said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to order you new hams. I'm going to bring them in here, and we'll take care of it, and we'll get those swapped out in no time. I said, man, that ain't going to work. Well, why not? I don't understand. It's like, those aren't my pigs. I didn't raise them. I don't.
Right.
The reason why I charge what I charge is because people are getting the pork that I raised. And yeah, he was a good guy. I mean, he made it right. He actually, I'll never forget, he turned around, opened his wallet, and he said, well, what would you sell those 18 hams for? And I told him, and he said, all right, here we go. And he literally rolled out. I mean, that was almost $1,000. And he rolled that out and said, I'm sorry, we'll take care of it. So yeah, they're guys trying to make a living as well. I think, as you said, having that trust established, getting a good relationship, making sure they understand that you're not just raising a commodity, you're not just raising something that you don't care if it gets swapped out, that this has a personal attachment to it. And if they respect that and do their best, we all make mistakes, but they have to rectify it when it's their problem.
Absolutely, and again, I know we're trying to cut it off here, but I've made mistakes with clients before too, and it's so much different when you can call me and hold me personally accountable than when you have to talk to the owner of a packing house who you're a 2-head line item, and we're processing 50,000 head this year. Right. You know what I'm saying? It's a different level of accountability.
Right. Definitely. All right. Well, this time we're really going to cut it off.
All right.
Well, Dan, I appreciate it. If people want to know more about your operation, where can they find you on the World Wide Web right now?
All right. Well, you can go to butcherpete's.com, but at the moment that's just going to take you right to our Facebook, or if you Google Butcher Pete's Mobile Meat LLC, all of our different social media and pages will come up, and a little press about us too. We won an award last year. Some articles about that will come up. So just if you throw Butcher Pete's Mobile Meat out into the internet, I'll pop up somewhere, and you can learn more about what I do. And I was on another podcast a couple weeks ago called the Off Farm Income Podcast, and just type that into the internet, and I'll come up. And if you're close by and you have a couple of hogs, give me a shout. I'm booking up for the fall. Awesome.
Excellent. So any of our listeners that are in the New England area there, again, looking at a map here so I can fully understand New England. The New Hampshire, Vermont area, southern Maine, I assume Massachusetts, because you're not that far from Massachusetts, are you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And do you go as far down as Connecticut into Rhode Island, or?
I could.
Probably
thing with Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts, I know we're not trying to start another conversation here, but the gun laws there are real iffy. So,
wow.
It's a little difficult to do the slaughter without a gun, but
sweet Lord.
Yeah, but anyway, if you're in New England, if you're within 100 miles or even 150, 200 miles of Keene, give me a call. If we can work it out, we can work it out.
Excellent. Well, Daniel, I appreciate your time, man. I enjoyed this conversation. Look forward to talking to you again.
Yeah, Troy, it was a blast, man. I can't wait to hear it.
All right, well, take care. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Well, all right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. I obviously really wanted to keep rolling on that. but I didn't want to make it a super long podcast. We may have to get Dan back on from time to time and get some additional updates and just talk about things from his perspective when it comes to processing. Well, if you want to know more about Dan, you check out his Facebook page. He mentioned that already, but just search Butcher Pete anywhere on Facebook, and he should pop up. Again, he's in the New Hampshire area there, so you can find him there. Give him a like. That way you can follow him there and see what he's got going on. If you're in the New England area or you have an operation in that area, consider giving Dan a call. Utilize his services there. Obviously, he's a growing business. He would love to have additional business, I'm sure. So give him a try if you're in that neck of the woods, if it makes sense. While we're asking for services, please take the time to rate and review our podcast if you would. Again, it really helps people find us. And I just want more people to hear these great stories that you all are sharing with me. So help us be found in the interwebs by rating us and reviewing us. I believe we have 3 ratings, and fortunately those 3 ratings are 5-star. I appreciate that. But we only have 3, and I don't think we have any reviews yet. So those 3 ratings could be my mom, my dad, and my wife. So hopefully there's some other people out there that that will show some love. If you would like to request future topics or future guests for the podcast, by all means, please just visit redtoolhouse.com. You'll see a link at the top, the Pastured Pig Podcast. You click on that. There's just a simple little form there, just a couple little things you fill in. I'll get that and reach out to you or respond appropriately if it's a topic or somebody you want to suggest we interview, or if you would like to be interviewed yourself. Well, I hope everyone's having a great day, great week out on the farm. Take care, everyone.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of the Pastured Pig Podcast. To learn more about our podcast or to submit topics or recommend guests for future episodes,
Visit redtoolhouse.com.